Well, good morning. I want to start by thinking back, and my three key takeaways from Mike's presentation. Aligned vision is critical for any member-focused effort. That notion of empathy, right? Kind of doing what's in the best interest of the member, thinking from the member's perspective. And I think most importantly for me is the criticality of the distinction between the University of Arizona and Arizona State University. And I say that as an Arizona alum, but I guess I'm on the opposite side of your intern there. But I saw a couple other Wildcats in the audience, so there we go. Go Wildcats, bear down. Well, good morning. I want to start off by asking you to think back to what you were doing in 1997. Oh my goodness, 20 years ago. You were probably just watching this movie where Jerry Maguire, Show Me the Money, was uttered. If you're anything like me, you were really excited because you had just installed that 56K baud modem into your computer. Oh my gosh, it was so fast and so quick to buy a book on Amazon because that's pretty much all they sold at that point in time. And from the credit union perspective, 1997, we were just on the cusp of HR 1151. All of the opportunity, all of the changes and challenges that would bring along, things were going pretty well for us in 1997. Fast forward, though, just 10 years, and my goodness, what a changed environment, right? We all know the effects of September 11th, not only on our country, but also on our economy. In those 10 years, we had lost over 2,000 credit unions through mergers, conservatorship, other actions. And so 2007, we were just beginning to see the early seeds of the Great Recession begin to be planted. My goodness, how much can change in the course of 10 years. So now let's fast forward. Here we are, 2017. I don't know that it's been a better time for credit unions than it is right now. We're at 105 million memberships nationwide. I just saw yesterday the NCUA announce that industry-wide, our loan growth was 10.4%, share growth 7%, solid, strong numbers. Our message of cooperative ownership, of fair-priced products for members is resonating stronger, more loudly than ever. But think, too, about what could happen, what probably will happen over the next 10 years. We will continue to see consolidation in our industry. Forecast in the next 10 years, about 2,000 credit unions will no longer exist. And that's not to say that efficiency is a bad thing, but wouldn't we all like to be the credit unions that are still in this room 10 years from now, right? We've seen the disruption. This is a slide that's probably been used more times than it should be. But the disruption that's coming from these non-traditional players with names that for many of us sound kind of wacky, like Acorns and Lending Robot and things like that, but are really compelling not only with their identity, but with also their product offering to members. And the critical aspect of this that we have to keep in mind is that with the ease of accessing apps, with the ease of accessing all of these competitors, our offering as credit unions, which for years has been wrapped around this notion of primary financial institution, may not necessarily be as relevant for our members when they can get their checking account at one institution, get their mortgage somewhere else, invest a few dollars with Acorn somewhere else. The model of offering everything to a member and expecting them to take it like they would at a buffet is kind of moving away, and it's more like a food truck, where if I'm the consumer, I can get my empanadas at one truck, and I can get my really great cupcake at another. What does this have as an impact to us as credit unions? What is the potential issue that we might see? A lot is going to be changing over the next 10 years. And in my mind, and you heard it from our colleague just a few minutes ago, the opportunity stands around innovation. It's thinking about existing issues in new ways, and how to respond from a credit union perspective. As you heard, my name is Andrew Down, and I'm the Managing Director of Research now at Filene Research Institute. I hopped over from the innovation world to research a few months ago. I've been with Filene for about 3 years. Got my start at Partners Federal Credit Union, leading marketing there, and led product development at Schools First, and now lead research for Filene. We've been around for nearly 30 years. We're a nonprofit 501c3 think tank that got its start in Madison, Wisconsin, thanks to CUNA and CUNA Mutual Group and a number of large credit unions that saw the importance of having an objective third-party research entity that would go out there, ask the critical questions for credit unions to compete in a changing environment, share the objective, honest, sometimes difficult outcomes of that research, and arm each and every one of your credit unions with the information needed to be more competitive. However, about 15 years ago, we realized that research alone is not enough. As much as I would love to say, yeah, that PDF that's probably sitting in your inbox is going to be all that you need to change the world, 30 pages of ink on paper isn't going to do a thing. It takes action. It takes change. And so 15 years ago, we started a program called I3. That is an collaborative innovation program for credit unions. I know we've got many former I3ers in the room. And really, it's this notion of innovation, looking to see how can we change our business models, how can we change our product offerings to our members and non-members, that has led us over the last 15 years to work with many of your credit unions to bring new innovation, new ways of thinking to our industry and our movement. So if I were to ask, and I'm not going to do this, but if I were to ask any of you to kind of name or think about what is our key differentiator that credit unions often hang their hats on, you'd probably say service, and that's terrific, and that's been our key differentiator for so long. But I'd like to offer up an example, and that example is actually Walmart. Walmart is the #1 retailer of tires, the #1 retailer of engagement rings, and the #1 retailer of shotguns. Not sure that the last two have any connection. Hopefully they don't. They have also come out, it's been a few years now, and I'm sure you all know about this, with the Bluebird kind of checking alternative product. And you may be thinking, and I know I've been a part of conversations where credit unions have said, oh, sure, that's Walmart. They're not known for service. They're not known for quality. We have nothing to worry about. Credit unions are all about service. Nobody can ever take that from us. Well, times are changing. Consumer Reports, probably one of the most recognized and notable consumer advocacy groups that's out there, recently identified the Walmart American Express Bluebird checking account alternative as their top recommendation from a quality perspective. Walmart got the #1 spot with the product that we have cornered the market on, checking accounts, for so long in credit unions. It's not enough anymore to simply say that service will differentiate ourselves. It's to simply say that a smile is going to be what brings members to us and keeps members coming back to us. And I would say it requires innovation. But innovation is easier said than done. What's blocking you? What's blocking you as an individual, as a leader? What's blocking you as a credit union from being as innovative as you could be and being as innovative as you truly need to be? Well, over the years, in talking with credit unions, we've identified a few common traits. As we go through these, I won't ask for a raise of hands to say, yep, that's me. But just think to yourself, maybe there's an opportunity for me, for my credit union, to take a step back and look at, yeah, maybe this is an issue that we need to deal with. The first is overconfidence. Now, confidence is critical in business. Confidence is critical in financial services. We need to make wise lending decisions. We need to make appropriate investment decisions, operational decisions. And thank goodness we've got over 1,000 years, of experience on this stage over the next 2 days. That's a lot of confidence and a lot of experience. But the challenge, the risk, comes when that confidence transitions into overconfidence. When we say, the way that we interacted with members in 1997, forget that, 2016 is the way that we should be interacting with members in 2017 and beyond. Now, I know that the next 2 days are all about data and about using the information and the histories and the experience that we have to make wise decisions moving forward, but I would say that we need to approach the past and its applicability to today with as much skepticism as we approach the future. Because we've got 150,000 data sources, millions of data points. Oftentimes, it's easy to fall into a trap of what's called confidence. bias, confirmation bias, where we're looking at that data and saying that the decision that we made last year that led to that data is the same exact decision that we should make in the future. Great classic example of this, Radio Shack. Y'all remember Radio Shack. So this is an ad. It's kind of dark. I apologize for that. This is an ad that Radio Shack ran in the early 90s. They were advertising all sorts of products. You've got the AM/FM clock radio. Oh, it was only $14. You've got a cell phone that's on there for hundreds, a computer that was $1,600. Altogether, the products that were on this page cost about $3,500. Every single one of them can be handled with this $299 plus a 2-year contract phone in my pocket. Radio Shack didn't see that future. Radio Shack was overconfident that the business model, that the product line that they had offered was going to be relevant and interesting for consumers in the future. And of course, we know what's happened to Radio Shack today. So I would ask you to not ignore the confidence and experience and expertise that you bring to decisions at your credit union, but ensure that you're approaching those decisions with the confidence of looking forward versus back. Another issue, those of us in this room, people just like us. We've all been in meetings, and perhaps some of us have been the ones to do this, where maybe we've got a teller that brings a new idea to us. Maybe we've got our board together for a planning session, and somebody suggests something that's a little out of the ordinary, or a little, I don't know if that would work. And the first thing that we often do is go, no, that'll never work. It's not even worth our time. Don't bring up things like that. Well, what happens over time is your employees, your leaders, begin to shut down and not share those creative ideas. So you heard that my first credit union that I worked at was Partners, the credit union for the Walt Disney Company. One of my creative idols is Walt Disney. Oh my gosh, I don't know that you can find a more creative individual on this planet today or in the past than Walt Disney. But he's got an interesting story. So you may know that he got his start in the Midwest, in Kansas City, actually. And he worked as a cartoonist for the Kansas City Star. This was in the early 20th century. So Walt Disney, as a youngster, was getting his start. He was coming up with some sample cartoons. The editor of that paper looked at them and said, Walt, you have not one creative bone in your body. You will never make it in the world of publishing. You will never make it in the world of entertainment. I'm not even going to run this cartoon. Get out. Wow. What a thing to hear. And we know the rest of the story. He didn't let that stop him. He got on a train. He went out west. It was literally on that train ride that the character that we now know as Mickey Mouse came to be. And Walt Disney's lesson that he took from this, that he put into practice at the Walt Disney Company, was that when he had writers in the room, when he had composers, the Sherman Brothers developing the songs that we could probably all hum and sing to ourselves today, when that creativity was going on, he kept the editors out. He knew that the editors were important. Editors are the ones who take a 3-hour film and edit it down to 90 minutes, so we're not dozing off in the middle of the theater. But he knew to bring the editors into the process at the right time, because if you bring the editors in too soon, to say, nope, that idea is bad, nope, that won't test well with our test market, when you bring them in too soon, you oftentimes minimize that ability to be creative. Editors are important. In the context of credit unions, who would be some of our editors? Well, our financial individuals, our compliance folks, they're very important. They are the ones who keep us in the good graces of the NCUA and out of prison. So we need compliance officers. We need CFOs. We need them to be a part of the conversation at the right point in time. So think to yourself, ask yourself, do I create an environment that allows for this free-form creativity from day one, and then on day 2 or 3, bring in the editors to really bring that reality to bear? Because as you heard, as we all acknowledge, we want to do the best for the member, but we also need to encourage financial sustainability. So it's important to bring those other points in at the right time. Another issue that we see, and again, we heard Mike talk about this, is unnecessary perfectionism. So again, we are in an industry that commands and demands perfectionism. I can't imagine a member being satisfied with us, oh, we'll have a $5 fudge factor on your checking account balance this month. No, they want perfection down to the penny. We need perfection in our monthly financial statements and other outputs. Perfectionism is important and critical. But when it comes to innovation, when it comes to new ideas, when it comes to prototyping, as we heard about, it can often be difficult and counterintuitive and counterproductive to put in the marketplace a perfect product from day one. Perfection is the enemy of progress. That sounds a little counterintuitive, doesn't it? But we see it in the market. We see it in other industries all the time. Can anybody, here we are in Seattle, so I'm sure somebody's going to raise their hand. Anybody know what this is a photo of? Anybody want to venture a guess? First Mac. Close. This is a good guess, though. This is a prototype, and we know this because it was evidence in one of the many lawsuits between Apple and Samsung. This was a prototype of the first software for the iPhone. What? This is a mess. This isn't ready for prime time, but this was exactly what Apple needed to put its software out in the hands of a focus group, out in the hands of test users, to see exactly how it worked, to see, oh, if I put the calendar icon here, what do the consumers think about it? No, this isn't interacting this certain way. I need to modify the way in which a call is presented on screen. They cobbled together parts and pieces from a Mac and from, there's a keyboard. In fact, I see there's like an old-fashioned phone even there and a big old speaker. It's not perfect, but it gave them the feedback and the information that they needed to make wise decisions as they went from version 0.5 to 1 to 2 and further on. Innovation isn't perfect at first, and if we expect it to be perfect, we won't be able to take those big risks. I want to share with you a video that I think is very relevant and timely. So this is Google, and we've all seen, of course, and heard about their self-driving vehicles. This is a video of one of their first test drives, prototype sessions, that they put their original self-driving vehicle in front of consumers. I want you to pay attention to this video for a number of different things. Look at the type of people that they put this prototype in front of. Look at what they chose to consciously include on the car and what they chose to not include in this prototype. Take a look at the Google self-driving vehicle, the first prototype.
Today, we have something extra special for you guys, and you guys will be some of the first people outside of our team and outside of Google to ever ride in it.
Oh, there it is. Oh, isn't that cute?
Cute and ugly, right?
Go ahead and buckle up.
Okay, Annie, here we go. Yeah. All right, Connie, let's go. There's no steering wheel in the way.
It was a big decision for us to go and start building our purpose-built vehicles for this. And really, they're prototype vehicles. They were a chance for us to explore what does it really mean to have a self-driving vehicle. But in the small amount of time we've been working on it, we have functional prototypes, and that's exciting.
It's really cool. It was like really kind of a space age experience.
Oh, okay. Hooray. We're like queens. Yeah.
You said, relax. You don't need to do nothing. It knows when it needs to stop. It knows when it needs to go.
It actually rides better than my own car.
Yes, sure.
What she really liked was that it slowed down before it went around a curve and then accelerated
In the
curve. She's always trying to get me to do it that way.
That's the way I learned in a high school driver's ed.
So if I had a self-driving car, I could spend more time hanging out with my kids or helping them with their homework, even just tending to them, finding out how their day was and not having to wait till you get home and have dinner and all that. So it'll be good.
Human feeling of it is very well engineered, and it is very smooth. There's nothing that makes you feel the least bit threatened. It's impressive. I'm totally in love with this whole concept.
Well, our lives are made up of lots and lots of little things. And a lot of those little things for most people have to do with getting from place to place in order to connect and do things, be with people, go places that they need to go and do things. And so there's a big part of my life that's missing, and there's a big part of my life that a self-driving vehicle would bring back to me.
This is the first step for us, and it's really exciting to see the progress we've made. The opportunity for people to just move around and not worry about it, it's going to be incredibly empowering and incredibly powerful for people.
I love this.
So that's Google's first version of their self-driving car. And if any of you have seen coverage of this, or you maybe even seen one on the road, they look a lot different than they did way back then. So as you watch that video, what stood out to you as far as the type of individuals that they brought to that test drive, what they were looking to hear, even the device that they were testing itself? Well, you probably saw there was definitely a bias toward older individuals. You saw a couple blind drivers. So they were looking to get feedback from those who could probably, in their mind, most benefit from a self-driving vehicle. It was interesting, though. You saw the mom and her son, that clip where they were just holding hands. Wow, do you think that Google was anticipating seeing that kind of insight that the car, it's going to get you somewhere more efficiently, but it could potentially also kind of enrich the time that you have, maximize the time that you have with a loved one. And then finally, what that car included, and more importantly, what it didn't include. In that prototype, I didn't see a radio. I didn't see them testing the radio. I'm sure that the entertainment system will be more dramatic than anything we've ever seen. I didn't see a fancy paint scheme. It was just kind of a dull white. For a prototype, Google realized and knew that it wasn't important to invest the money. It wasn't important to spend the time testing things that really didn't have relevance to the core of what they wanted to understand. So again, think about when you're putting out prototypes, if you are sharing prototypes, spend enough money, but as little money and as little time as you have to get a minimum viable product out in front of your members so that you can have that valuable feedback, get that valuable information to make a wise product and make iterations as you move forward. Another challenge that we often hear about, which I always have thought is kind of ironic, is risk avoidance. Oh my goodness, I've heard so many credit unions say, innovation is just too risky. We're in the business of risk, folks. Every time we make a loan, every time we make an investment decision, every time we put a plastic card out in our members' hands, that's risky. Any marketers in the room? Anybody who was even tangentially related to marketing? So if I were to ask you, a good old-fashioned postcard direct mail campaign, what a tremendously successful response rate would be, what would you say? 2%, 3%? If you're getting 3%, you're awesome. So let's go with 3%. We're going to go with the best case scenario. 3% response rate, and that number totally pencils out, right? We've done the ROI, we've done the numbers, the CFO signed off. Let's flip that around. We're totally comfortable with a 97% failure rate. It works out, it's okay. Why, if we're comfortable with risk in loans, risk in investments, risk in marketing campaigns, is it so difficult for us as financial institutions, as leaders, to take on even a bit of risk when it comes to product development or innovation? One of the metrics that we're seeing some credit unions begin to test is a minimum level of failure. Minimum level of failure. So this is appearing on some credit union board scorecards, management scorecards, where they're expecting at least 15%, let's say, of every new product, or 15% of every marketing campaign to be a complete failure. They expect it. If you hit 14%, you haven't met that metric and you don't get whatever your incentive is. Why is that? Because if you're not saying that I'm comfortable and I expect some level of failure, again, the numbers have to pencil out on the back end. If you're willing to accept some level of failure, you're encouraging that risk-taking on the part of your employees. Risk avoidance. One way to consider kind of how do we begin to take some calculated risks is to look at your innovation portfolio as we might look at our own investment portfolio. So if you're saving for retirement, it would be quite unwise for you to put all of your money in high-risk international stocks. It would probably be equally unwise to put all of your retirement in 3-month certificates, which are earning, 25 basis points if we're lucky. You've got to have a balance. And that's similar to how institutions, organizations should look at innovation. So this is a model that came out of Harvard, actually. And it looks at balancing your innovation among 3 different categories. So the first is incremental innovation. This is not sexy innovation. These are process improvements, they're tweaks. This is a streamlining of a system to shave 7 seconds off of a teller transaction time. This is not going to get you on the cover of the Credit Union Journal. But it's powerful because these changes come with very low risk. And when you multiply that savings from 7 seconds over 100,000, 200,000 teller transactions as an example, you get a pretty moderate and decent financial impact, which then you can take some of that portion of what you've saved with that incremental innovation and invest it into these 2 other categories, the second being architectural. And so these are more systematic or structural changes. Maybe it's a new organization or reporting structure. Maybe it's a new card processing system or core processing system that's going to enable a series of new opportunities and changes. That's architectural. And then the final, this is the one that we all strive for, but few of us ever get to, and that's disruptive innovation. That's basically the credit union version of the iPhone, whatever that might be, right? We all think, many of us think, that you've got to be aiming for this. You want to aim for that sometimes. But if you can aim, and in fact, the ratio that typically we'll see organizations allocate is 70% of their R&D budget, IT exploration budget to incremental innovation, 20% or so to architecture, and only about 10% to disruptive. So right there, you've got a balancing out of the financial risk. And again, as you have some quick, not very sexy wins on those incremental innovations, you can allocate a bit of that to these more high risk, potentially high potential and impact innovations. So considering that balancing. Another challenge that we see is lack of structure. So we heard some examples from First Tech and some of the other questions that came up around kind of how do we structure for some of these new innovative things that we're looking to do. And so we have some research at Filene that was just published by a guy named Dennis Campbell, who's a professor at Harvard, that took a look at this idea of all organizations, and credit unions are included, are in this constant tug of war between what they call exploit versus explore. And so exploit sounds bad, but it's really tapping into and leveraging what we already do very well. So optimizing branch operations to serve more members more effectively, making sure that our lending underwriting guidelines are running efficiently and are not pushing us into too much risk. We do that very well, and it's important. On the other end of the spectrum is explore, and this is basically the innovation. And it's difficult for many organizations, again, credit unions included, to know the right mix, and most importantly, to know the right structure to make this happen. So we looked at in this work a concept called organizational ambidexterity. That's a mouthful, even for a presenter. But the idea behind organizational ambidexterity is that you have to structure your organization to do both. And it has to be flexible because in 2017, I may need more exploitation of my current product line than exploration based on my financial condition, let's say. And so there are 2 different types of ambidexterity. The first is structural. And a good example of this is Alphabet, which of course is the holding company now for Google. And also X. So if you know much about Alphabet, they've got Google, which is kind of their exploit function. So Google, YouTube, the Android device, kind of those lines of business, they focus on exploiting what they're doing well today. And they've consciously made the decision to create X, which is kind of this mysterious, separate exploration group that's looking at the self-driving vehicle, it's looking at other innovations. Their pay structure, their incentives are completely different. X is incentivized to take smart risks, but also to cut losses early if they don't feel they're going to pan out. Well, that incentive structure certainly wouldn't apply to those who were selling ad space on Google or trying to optimize YouTube. The other end of the spectrum is what we call contextual ambidexterity, and this is usually what we see in credit unions. And basically, this is saying I'm not going to spend the money to have a separate innovation group, but I'm going to expect all of my departments to kind of do their own exploit, explore balancing. And a non-credit union example of this is a company called Haier. If you've ever heard of Haier, they're kind of known for kind of these cheap knockoff electronics in the US. But the cool thing about Haier, they're out of China, is that they've got a pretty lengthy history of innovation. One of the coolest innovations that Hire's come up with, this is China, so you've got a lot of agriculture farmers. They developed a washing machine that can not only wash clothes, but it can also wash the vegetables that farmers are selling. That's pretty cool. And so the way that Hire has structured their innovation, their exploit versus explore, is contextual, meaning that each team is responsible for figuring out and investing in and spending their own time in whatever they feel is the right mix of explore versus exploit. So you've got the microwave team, you've got the washing machine team, whatever teams there are, they're balancing it out those ways. So my recommendation is, as a credit union, think about which structure might make sense. Again, most often we see contextual. We're beginning to see structural more so, particularly in the realm of QSOs. So that's a perfect example of how credit unions can continue to do what they do best, operate and serve members, yet perhaps make an investment in QSOs that are willing to take on some of these emerging ideas and some more of the risk. So organizational ambidexterity. The final issue that we often see around lack of structure is simply no process when it comes to coming up with new ideas. And we're going to try an exercise. I'd like each of you to just take out a pen and paper. You've got paper in front of you. If you want to be really modern, you can use your iPad or your iPhone. And I'm going to give you a challenge. I ask that you work individually. And I want you to spend 60 seconds to think of as many solutions as you can. And your goal is 60 ideas. To solve for this challenge, I just came up with the challenge that many credit unions face. We want to improve mortgage loan application convenience for millennial members. So your task is to write down or jot down 60 ideas, 60 creative solutions to solve that challenge in 60 seconds. I have a stopwatch, and we're going to start right now. There you go. All right, so you've got 60 seconds to come up with 60 solutions. We're improving mortgage loan application convenience for millennial members. Don't work with your partner. Stick to that piece of paper. Stick to that phone, whatever you're doing. We're about 15 seconds in. You should have 15 ideas already on paper. Everybody have 15? Focus just on this. Don't think about any other group. Don't think about the older members. We're not talking about Gen X. Well, we are talking about Gen X. We're not talking about baby boomers. We're not talking about the silent generation. We're talking about Gen X, Gen Y mostly. Put those ideas down. 35 seconds. You should have most of your ideas done. Again, don't think about any other industry. We're thinking only about mortgage loans. I don't want you to care about auto loans. Forget credit cards right now. This is all about mortgages. You have 15 seconds left. Here comes the countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Pencils and iPhones down. Who got 60 ideas? Raise your hand proud. Nobody. Anybody get 30 ideas in 60 seconds? Anybody get 15? No? 10. Somebody got a few people with 10. Okay. And hopefully their ideas, they're not just, why is this guy making me do this? Why is this guy making me do this? So I kind of set you up to fail, right? I did. And more often than not, that is how we as credit unions, that is how we as leaders ask our teams to come up with new ideas. We say, okay, we've got a challenge at hand. We're going to bring together a few people that don't have very much to do. We're going to stick you in a room for 4 hours. And oh, by the way, there are some bean bags, which instantly means it's creative. You've done it. You know you have. Maybe it's a painted wall. And come up with the ideas. And it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Because there's no structure. Brainstorming, and that's really what that is, brainstorming is okay, but it's not really the best way to come up with new ideas. It's not really the most successful and efficient way to innovate. And why is that? So oftentimes the moderator wields too much power. I was doing that. I was saying, no, focus on mortgages. Don't talk to your neighbor, blah, 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 blah. You've got 15 seconds. That was stressful. And many times as leaders, we'll go into that room 2 hours in and say, how many ideas do you have? You better come up with something that's a winner. Moderators wielding too much power. Shutting down ideas from the get-go. This kind of gets back to the people and the personalities. And I would guess that 50% of the people in this room, as you were writing down your ideas, you had an idea come into your mind, and you told yourself, no, that's stupid, or no, that would never work. I'm not even going to bother to write that down. Even though you know nobody's going to check your work, you are your own worst enemy. And oftentimes, we shoot our own ideas down just as much or even more so than we shoot other ideas down. And just overall, there's not a lot of structure. And what we found in Filene and I3 over the last almost 15 years is that structure, believe it or not, having a process actually makes the innovation process go by much more smoothly. So I keep talking about this I3, and many people always ask, what does I3 stand for? Are there actually 3 I's? And there are. First is ideas, then innovation, and I think the most important, which is implementation. Getting back to ideas are great, but if you don't do anything with it, if you don't put it in action, what's the point? We ask I3ers to volunteer 2 years of their professional lives above and beyond their day job to innovate on behalf of credit unions and members. Over the last decade plus, they've come up with over 200 ideas. We want to implement some of those. It's not motivating to sit around and come up with ideas and not see them be implemented. And again, that requires a process. And these are ideas that have saved members millions of dollars. They've brought tremendous new operational efficiency. They've even changed a few state laws. And I want to share with you just a couple examples of what we've seen in I3 from many of your colleagues over the last few years. And the first idea that came out of I3 starts with what I found to be a pretty startling statistic, and that's $514. Can anybody guess what the significance of $514 is? The background kind of gives it away. It's what the average household spends in the U.S. per year playing the lottery. Yeah, that's more than the average household spends per year on milk. And now that I live in Wisconsin, this was rather relevant. It's more than the average household spends on beer. They like to drink beer and milk. But $514 a year. And these are the types of households, this is a generalization, but by and large, can't generally afford to play the lottery. So we had credit union innovators come together and say, what if we could come up with a credit union product that would tap into the psychological excitement that comes from playing the lottery, but benefit the member, move them along a path toward financial sustainability and security, and also benefit the credit union. And many of you have heard of PrizeLink Savings. If you've heard of PrizeLink Savings, that actually got its start in the early 2000s from Filene I3, the Michigan Credit Union League, and a few other credit unions, where basically now, and this is legal in I believe 17 states, the big pushback is from the state lotteries because they're the ones we're kind of competing against on this, where a credit union will offer a share certificate or a special deposit account that for every $25 that a member deposits, you get one entry into a drawing, and the drawing occurs every quarter or every year. It's up to the credit union. And basically one person will win a big golf-sized check. In this case, this was literally the first winner ever, Billy. She won $100,000. And there are other prizes as well. But basically, it leverages that excitement of playing the lottery with a deposit product, so that if I'm not Billy, if I don't necessarily win the big $100,000 at the end of the quarter or at the end of the year, I still have that $514 that I didn't deposit. Not a lot of technology with this one, but this is tremendously innovative because it's taking a process, it's taking the ideas behind behavioral economics and wrapping a product around it. And again, it's been vetted and structured so that it makes financial sense for the credit union as well. Came from I3. Another concept that's a bit more recent has to do with another major issue in the marketplace, and this is student loan debt. So $30,000 is the average amount that a college graduate will leave with a diploma in one hand and debt in the other. And that's just those who graduate. It's a bigger issue for those who don't graduate. So we had a team from I3 look at how could we tackle this, and they came up with a concept called Debt Dragon. I want to play for you a very quick video that goes through what Debt Dragon is all about.
The average undergrad leaves college with a diploma in one hand and nearly $30,000 in student loan debt in the other. Up until now, solutions have focused on dealing with debt once it's become a financial burden. But Debt Dragon is different. Instant on-screen results show how each decision could impact a student's future debt burden. Choose a lower-priced college or apply for scholarships and watch the number drop. Insist on a new car your freshman year or a pricey private college and see your debt forecast skyrocket. Debt Dragon helps your members and their loved ones keep from falling off a cliff of student loan debt while keeping them engaged with your credit union. Want to help test Debt Dragon? Visit filene.org/innovate. Together, we can save future students from the burden of too much debt.
So if you looked at those screenshots, it looked an awful lot like TurboTax, and that was actually the inspiration for Debt Dragon. What if we could present to high schoolers and their families a mechanism to, on the fly, make decisions about, I want to go to the University of Arizona, or I want to go to Harvard, I want to live off campus, I want to live on campus, I'm going to have a job, I'm not going to. What the effect of those various decisions are, not just on what their future debt might be, but on what their projected future student loan payment might be. And we're actually testing this now on behalf of credit unions, working with our friends at CU Student Choice to see, does this have an impact not only on the members' financial security, but also on their loyalty and kind of relationship and mindset with the credit union. Does this cause them to kind of look at their credit union in a more positive way? The final one I want to mention has to do with the challenge that many of us as credit unions face, and I remember when I led marketing, this is back in the 90s, we were trying to tackle this. New membership referral campaigns, we've all done them. Usually the way that it works is we give a current member 6 slips of paper or something like this, and we say, hey, write your name and the last 4 digits of your social security number, member number out, and hand them around, and never really works. So what the i3 team did is they looked at this expense, $442 per member on average it takes to onboard a new member. They said, how can we streamline this? And they were inspired by Uber. So how many of you have used Uber before? How many of you first came to know Uber because somebody sent you a referral code that got you your first ride free? A lot of you did. So the team came up with a concept called Member Megaphone, and this has been tested now, and it's moving through our incubator, that basically takes that Uber model and applies it to the membership referral process to say every new member gets a unique referral code that's theirs and theirs only. And then they're given the opportunity to text, to tweet, to post on Facebook, or send via an old-fashioned email this code to their friends and family. And that referral is handled all online. It connects back with the core system to analyze all the metrics, to help fulfill any rewards or incentives that are out there. And during our first round of testing with 6 credit unions, we actually had a 34% referral rate using this app. Now, the first question that many people ask is, well, that's great. You had the quantity, but did you have the quality of new accounts as well? And it's hard to tell early on, but in the first 90 days, we had about 600 accounts brought in, and we had over $2 million in loans and over $1 million in deposits. So again, that's kind of an early indication that, hey, these aren't necessarily $0 balance accounts that are coming through. And again, these are ideas that are being developed in a not-for-profit think tank by your colleagues in i3. And it's totally possible. The last one that I want to mention, this is kind of on the horizon. I love this one. How many of you have an Apple Watch or some other sort of smart watch? A number of you do. So you know it's got this mechanism called haptic feedback, where it taps you on the wrist when it tries to get your attention. Full disclosure, when I've got about 10 minutes left, it's going to start to tap me on the wrist. It's also got a microphone, which is cool. And so we had an innovation team look at, okay, what are some challenges that members face? And they wanted to land on buying a new car. So many of us have all sorts of mechanisms to give our members great details and information on the pricing of that new car before they go into the dealer. Once they go into that dealer's office, all bets are off. And human nature takes over, and we get stressed, we get a little embarrassed, and we walk out kind of feeling like we didn't get the best deal. So this idea that the innovation team has come up with is, what if, given permission by the member, as the member is in negotiating with the dealer, the watch is listening in on the negotiation. It's listening in on the offer that the dealer is giving for a 2017 Honda Accord, let's say. The watch is connected to my database at the credit union, and I know instantly all the other loans that I've made and the values on cars for other 2017 Honda Accords. Using the haptic feedback, I'm able to subtly tap my member on the wrist to say, based on what we know about you, you can get the dealer down a bit further. And the data implications of that. It's available, it's possible. I don't know that we'd really have the dealers in our corner if we offered that, but something that, again, the i3 program is looking at. So 200 ideas plus over the last 15 years, nearly. What's the secret sauce? And we have come up with a method. It's called the Filene method of innovation, not very creatively named. And it's taken off and inspired by IDEO. So if you know IDEO, very world-renowned product development and innovation company based in Northern California. Focused on human-centered design. We heard about human-centered design a little bit earlier. And this process, the i3ers go through, starting with insights, looking at all sorts of data points, taking in the world, understanding what the challenges are for members, coming up with new ideas, prototyping and testing those, and then sharing those. And I mentioned that i3ers go through a 2-year volunteer cycle. They go through 4 of these cycles, each 6 months, during their tenure with i3. And it's a method that's been proven. Again, we've worked with credit unions to offer this method and test it, and it works. And it's relatively new for us. When we first started off, we kind of did innovation with our i3ers the same way we all tried that, to say, hey, go off and go to New Orleans for 3 days and see what sort of ideas you come up with. It doesn't work as well as this structure. I mentioned that human-centered design. This is truly critical, we feel, to any successful innovation. And the idea behind human-centered design is that any successful innovation needs to satisfy 3 criteria. And you can see them here. The first is desirability. And this is essentially, is it solving a problem that our end user has? And is it solving it in a way that they're going to appreciate and use? And then we've got feasibility, which is, do we have the systems? Do our IT systems allow for this product to be offered? Do we have the data to effectively offer this? Do we have the organizational structure to bring this product to life? Feasibility. The final one is viability, so financial sustainability, which I think might be a better term to use versus profitability, financial sustainability. So is it going to add to whatever our financial goals are as a cooperative? The goal is to get to that center where whatever new idea I have satisfies all 3 of those. Now, in most credit unions, and you heard this alluded to a little bit earlier, we start in one of the bottom 2 rungs. We say, well, our core system will allow us to do this, or we need to hit a 75% loan-to-share ratio this year, so let's come up with a new product. The beauty in human-centered design is that it has to always start from your members' eyes. One of the first things we tell I3ers when they're coming up with problems that they want to solve is that don't you dare say that your problem is that your ROA is only 80 basis points. Don't you dare say that your loan-to-share ratio is the issue and it's only 75%. The problem truly is if you don't have a high enough ROA, you're not meeting your members' needs in the way that they want to be met. So let's start thinking about the member, that notion of empathy that we heard about. Make sure that it fits the financial goals. Make sure that it fits within the systems that we have available. And if it doesn't, let's create or buy the systems, if it makes sense. But always starting from your members' eyes. And I was so excited to hear this notion of empathy come up. One of the tools that we teach in I3, and when you get the slides, you'll get this worksheet. I would really recommend that you use this in a leadership team meeting or in a department meeting. So we call the empathy map. And the empathy map is a great tool to use to get in the mind of whoever it is, usually it's a member in our case, that has a challenge that we're trying to deal with. So in this example, we've named the person who has this issue Samantha Switcher because she's trying to switch from a bank to a credit union. This is a challenge that credit unions have been trying to overcome for years. Switch kits and all sorts of things. And so the way that the empathy map works is we say, okay, when Samantha, and this is a made-up character, of course, but when Samantha is considering switching from a bank to a credit union, what sorts of feelings and experiences is she going through? What is she hearing her friends and colleagues say? What is she feeling? What is she seeing, saying, and doing? Oftentimes what we see members do in this circumstance is they open the account with the best of intentions. They never fund it, or they never move their direct deposit and other payments, and then we've got another zero balance share on our books. This isn't the solution necessarily, but we feel it's the perfect entry point, paired up with focus groups, paired up with surveys, one-on-one interviews, to really understand what is the challenge that the member is facing from an emotional standpoint when they're going through whatever the issue is. And we, with very significant intent, use the word empathy and not sympathy. Because there's a big difference. Sympathy is if I'm driving down the street and I see a woman and her child sitting on the curb because their car is broken down, oh my gosh, that makes me feel so bad. That's kind of egotistical sympathy. Empathy is putting yourselves in the shoes of the person who's going through that challenge. And just as we heard this morning, we can have the best of intentions. We can think that we know what our member wants, that we're speaking and acting on their behalf. But until we actually listen to them, until we get into their mind, there's no way to know for sure. So what can we do with all this? There's a lot that can be done. I know I've bombarded you with a lot. Hopefully a couple things that you've said, we need to stop doing this. We need to change this at our credit union. Maybe a couple ideas. Maybe it's the empathy map. Maybe it's some sort of structure. A few things that we'd recommend. Go on to filing.org. Many of you are members of Filing, and we very much appreciate that, and thank you for that. You and your colleagues have access to those 27, 28 years of research. You have access to all of the concept documents for free that are out there from I3. We'd love nothing more than if a credit union took one of those ideas that we've kind of prototyped and ran with it. There's a lot out there. Go on to filing.org. Check out something that we've called Innovation Immersion. It's basically where we bring the I3 process to your individual credit union. But most importantly, knock down those innovation roadblocks, whether it's overconfidence, whether it's aversion to risk. Maybe try that minimum failure rate. Look for a couple roadblocks and see what you can do to begin to structurally knock those down. Collaborate. You heard it again this morning. I feel like The presentation before mine was a wonderful preamble and case study for all of this. We've got such an opportunity to collaborate in this room that for-profit, large commercial banks don't necessarily have. Let's work together and basically try something new. You deserve it, your members deserve it, and I want to end in a very risky way with a slide that has a lot of math on it. So I've always had kind of an affinity for math. I'm a CPA, so I guess you could say it's in my DNA. How many of you from junior high or high school algebra remember something called a step function? Does anybody remember something called a step function? So you may have heard it called a taxi function too. So basically it says over time you've got a certain value or result that's kind of stable, and then something sudden happens. In the case of a taxi, you hit the next quarter mile, and all of a sudden whatever that metric is jumps, and then it's stable for a while. That's a step function. And I would suggest that many of us in our personal lives, in our professional lives, kind of live life as a step function. It's easy to coast. It's easy to glide. It's easy to perhaps hear some of the cues and the clues around us that we should take action on. Maybe it's something personal. Maybe we get a bad medical result back from the doctor, and we say, I'll deal with that later. Maybe we see a new competitor in the marketplace, and we say, we don't want to focus on that just yet. And we coast. And then something sudden happens. We get a call from the doctor that says, we need to talk now. You find that you've got members fleeing to a competitor, and you really have to up your game suddenly. And we're so good at that. We can do that. We do that. We up our game. We eat better. We bring the board in for an emergency session. We dust off that strategic planning. We say, we need to deal with this right now. And we do, and we succeed. And what do we do the next day? We often level off and say, well, we're good now until the next crisis comes up. Wow, what a lot of missed opportunity there is with that. So if I were to take that line, what I'd call the reactive path, and pair that up against basically a straight line, which I would say is the creative or the innovative path, this is the path toward innovation, where we're constantly looking around the corner, we're constantly appreciating and listening to those cues and acting on those. I3, implementation, act on it. To preempt the sudden issue that will come up in our lives. And if I had another 15 minutes, which I wouldn't, which I don't, I would tap into my calculus history and say we could fairly easily calculate the area of these triangles, which is essentially the quantification of missed opportunity, of lost profits, of members who went somewhere else, dissatisfied members who never told us they were going somewhere else, of our own personal health, the goal that we've had in the back of our mind that we've never acted on. We can quantify that. And our goal, your goal, on behalf of your credit union, on behalf of your members, should be to move as much as you can from that reactive path to the creative path, to minimize those triangles. Because as leaders of a cooperative institution, we owe it to our members. They fund our operations. They fund their own futures. And if we're not moving toward that creative, innovative path, we're doing them a disservice. We're not doing our movement the justice that's been developed over the last 100 years from our founding fathers in Estes Park, Colorado. That's why we're here. Thank you guys very much. I hope I've inspired you, given you a few tools. We've got a couple minutes if you've got any questions. Thank you.
So we'll open up for the audience questions. And
yes.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about what Filene or I3 is doing with that buffet versus food truck mentality and not trying to be all things to all people, and what you've seen from your research?
Yeah, so one of the interesting angles that we had an I3 team take last year, and it kind of goes back to credit union collaboration, is to say that we know that the best case scenario is for one credit union to be able to offer everything to the member, but we know that that's not necessarily practical. We may have one credit union that excels in mortgage funding. We may have another credit union that excels in something else. That, similar to shared branching, what if we got together as credit unions and said, well, we're going to have one master account, but with products that are offered and serviced by other credit unions. We do this to a certain extent today with serviced mortgages, but we're saying, what if we could have products that kind of operate under a shared branching methodology, like we've found is successful with delivery channels? So it's kind of saying, we may hope that credit union members come to us for everything, but if we can't offer them everything exceptionally, why can't we partner with other credit unions? So it's kind of a different angle to that, but they're looking at that. Obviously, there are a lot of forces that might not necessarily be open to that. There are a lot of competitive issues around that, but it's something that we feel is worth looking at. Thank you. All right. Thank you guys again. Turn it over to Naveen.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question
Oh,
from the
yes.
audience. Yeah. So I think it's based on the ad that you showed on the Google prototype, that how the members reaffirmed and on how they liked and through the feels and the gestures. But when in our bank, what happens is that members give our feedback north, south, west on different arenas. How do you deal with those when you're trying to create a product?
So if I understand kind of the crux of the question, how do you deal with feedback that isn't necessarily focused? Or how do you decide among various points of feedback? Yeah. So my advice would be to lean on prototyping again. So if we've got, let's say we've had 200 survey responses come back and we see, well, 55% want this particular product feature set and 25% want another one, build a prototype, put it out there and see what people want. Oftentimes we find, and I'm sure you found this as credit unions in surveying, that when you put a couple options out for people, they'll say they want everything, but we have to as consumers prioritize. So I would recommend a technique called conjoint analysis, where basically you put various combinations of feature and price sets in front of a member to say, if you can't have everything, if you had the choice between a high set of features and a higher price, or a low set of features and a low price, just as an example, what would they choose? It's a great way to get from members who want everything down to understanding what exactly they want.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you. All right, thanks again.
Thank you, Andrew.